For this assignment, one of the most valuable tools we have at our disposal is the displacement map filter. The displacement map filter allows us to take the tonal values of an image and use that as a map to warp another image. Let me show you what I mean. A common demonstration for this is to just take a flag and add some waves to it. Now, for a displacement map to work at as best as possible, you'll want it to be the same size as what you're displacing, which is why I've started with this flag. I'm just going to toss the flag into the edit buffer by going Control A to select all, Control C to copy. I'm going to make a new layer by going Control plus N, and voila, this will be the exact same size as the flag. I'm going to call this displacement map, or flag displacement map. Okay, and I'm going to make the background color white for the moment. Tell it okay. So we have a standard image. Now, displacement maps will essentially bend your image that you apply it to around, and we'll talk about this again in a second, but just a heads up as to why I'm doing this. Anything lighter than 50% gray will go up and left. Anything darker will go down and right. At 50% gray, you won't have any effect at all, which means we really need access to 50% gray to start and then to move things around. So I'm going to double click my color, and then I'm just going to slide over to the left and pop the brightness at 50% to get that 128 all down the line, or 80, 80, 80 gray. Going to tell it okay, fill that thing up, and now I'm just going to make a new layer so that I can do this cautiously. Get the default colors. Now, since we have the white pushing, as I bump into my microphone, as we have the white pushing things up and left, I'm going to try to take advantage of that. Let's see how we can do this. Oops, this is black. Let me flip that around. Shrink down my brush a bit. I'm just going to shift click to make a straight line. That's far too hard. I want something very, very soft. And that's still a hardness of 0, and it's just not soft enough to meet my needs. So I'm probably going to use a selection instead, and then feather it a lot. So I'm just going to grab this square marquee tool, draw a box, go up to select, modify, transform. Sorry, I will go to select, modify, select, transform selection. Sometimes I think I'm in older versions of Photoshop. I'm just going to rotate this, press enter, and I'm going to feather this. I'm going to go to to select, modify, feather. At least that one's where I remember it. Do 50. All right, and there we go, nice and soft. And so what I really wanted to do though is to do that for all of them. So I'm going to quickly hold down the shift key, do that for all of them. I want to have a number of stripes that are having this effect. I want them further apart. Now my plan is to make the flag wave with the displacement map. So I need to have some light and some dark bars. All right, now I will transform with a select, transform selection. Hold down the Alt key, hold down the Shift Alt key now on this version of Photoshop to stretch it up and down. Now I'll feather it with a select, modify, feather. 50 sounds good. And fill that. Okay, so I have these light bars that are very soft going on. I'm going to make a new layer. Call this white bars. And I'm going to invert my selection, Control Shift I, on this new layer, which will be black bars. Oops, and I'm going to get black in the front and fill it in. Now, I'm not super happy with this because I've put too much black everywhere, so I need to shrink this. So I'm going to go to select, modify, contract, do 20 pixels. That's not enough. Let's do 40. Select, modify, contract, 40 pixels. All right. And transform this. Select, transform selection. Okay. So now I'll have some areas, but not others. Beautiful. There we go. This is really what I'm after. Let's see how this works. So I'm just going to save this first as a the flag displacement map as a PSD. But here's the key. As Photoshop has progressed, they've become more and more lax with the settings you need to use to make a displacement map, which is excellent. But if you find yourself on an older version of Photoshop, you've got a problem. So what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to set this thing up to be a completely compatible displacement map for any version of Photoshop. And this is easy enough to do. I'm going to convert it, make sure it's in black and white I know in this case it is, but I'll be absolutely sure. I will put a black and white layer on the top. You can see that there were no changes because it is already in black and white. And then I'm going to duplicate this entire thing because it's all going pretty well and I'm about to completely desaturate it, which will destroy it. So I'm going to go to my favorite method, which is just go to my history window under window history, and then click on the create new document from current state. So now I'm in a duplicate of the flag displacement map. Now I'm going to flatten this entire thing, get this history out of the way, flatten this entire thing and my layers fly out, flatten image, and I'm going to go to image mode, grayscale. Do you have to do this? No, not really. Should you do this? Yeah, probably. The reason is that if you ever end up on an older version of Photoshop, this will work for all of them. This will always work. The last key is to save as, and it needs to be a Photoshop document. I'm going to call it the flag displacement map 1 layer. So that will allow me to have a completely compatible displacement map. All right, so that was a lot of work, but what's the end result here? What's the point? Well, the point is to apply it. So I'm going to go to Filter, Distort, and unfortunately it doesn't say Displacement Map, it just says Displace. Now this is an ancient system. So some of these things are going to be confusing. Make a note of this, write this down. You don't choose your displacement map until you tell it OK. Now, your displacement map, if it's not the same size as the document that it's displacing, it will either need to be stretched, or it will just cut it down, or it needs to be tiled so that it will take it and then we'll put it next to each other again and again and again and again and again and again, much like a pattern. Ours is exactly the same size, so it doesn't matter. Now, you have two options for undefined areas. You can wrap around, or you can repeat the pixel edge. If you wrap around, it will just push it to the other side. If you repeat, it will smear it. And we'll see a bit of that in a moment. I'm going to exaggerate this with, say, 50 pixels on both horizontal and vertical. I'm going to tell it OK. And I'm going to go to my 1 layer displacement map. Notice it immediately brought this window up. And look at that. It has this crazy distortion effect going on. Now, in some places, this isn't really what you want, but in others, you get this phenomenal ripple. So let's try a few other settings. Let me undo. And before we change anything, let's make this a smart object. That way we can more easily do adjustments. Convert to smart object. Now I can, and if you're on an older version of Photoshop, you can't do the displacement map on a smart object. This is more recent. If that's the case, just duplicate it and do a destructive edit. You'll be fine. All right, I'm going to do filter, distort, displace. So we saw it with repeat. Notice we can embed the file data in the smart object. This will increase the document size, but it means that we can edit it more easily. So we're totally going to do that. Let's wrap around, grab our 1 layer displacement map. Notice that we've got this effect going on instead of a big smear. Also, because we have a smart filter, we can open up the displacement map again by, double clicking it And then we can change it so that, say, the horizontal scale is only 10. Now it's going to ask me for the displacement map again, which is always aggravating. But here we go, getting a slightly different effect. I still don't like how much is happening on these stars, but because it's a smart filter, I can grab my brush and I can apply it to the mask, and I can start doing adjustments. And I can do that to different amounts. So I could do all kinds of crazy things. So if I want to, say, warp some stars differently, I can do exactly that. So the question becomes, if you have these bizarre distortions, these over distorted effects, well, what good is it? Well, first, it's fun. Second, you don't have to push it that many pixels. You could, for example, and let's take a look inside of the smart layer, by the way. Notice that even though the it's embedded things, it's not easily accessible. It's not readily available. And in fact, if we were to go in and edit this again, every time we press OK, it will ask for that displacement map again. So keep track of your displacement map. You don't need to turn that in, but do keep track of it. All right, so how do we deal with this distortion? It's pretty easy. Let's do 5 by 5 pixels. There we go. That's it. I think that's a bit more natural. And because of wraparound, we do have an issue that it's got this strange effect. You'd want to go in there and clean that up with a mask or something to that effect. So what if we did a different sort of displacement map? Let me get rid of the smart filter. What if we were to Control A, Control C, Control N, enter, just fill this with a solid gray. And that will be at 50%. So we get the gray, fill that in. What if we just did this? Brush. D for default. And 100%. There we go. All right, and flip it. Okay, so we've got this weird circle. Let me save this as displacement test. Okay, come back over here. We've got our smart object, filter, distort, displace, and let's do some 10 by 10 pixels on this. All right, tell it okay. Open our test, displacement test. We have something going on. What if we make that even more extreme? Distort, displace. Let's do 60. And go back to our test. Oh, look at that. Can you apply the same displacement twice? Yes. Do it as many times as you need to. And we'll start loading multiple displaces on. So let's do that a few more times. Let's do, or we could do this, 1,000, well, 99 by 999 by 999 pixels. Watch this. Whoa. We can start getting some really crazy effects going on using displacement maps as well. So this is artistically an interesting one as well. So how will this work in general? Well, I feel it's very important. While you can use a number of other tools for the displaying with displacement maps assignment, if you start with the displacement map, everything is much easier. So we're going to go ahead and walk through on how to do that on the next few videos. See you in a minute.